Good morning and welcome to the Chamber of Commerce, Southern New Jersey's virtual Energy Insights Committee meeting. My name is Christina Renna and I am President and CEO of the Chamber. It's my pleasure to welcome all who have logged on to join us today, so thank you so much for being with us. I am extremely grateful to today's guests. We have Richard S. Moroz, Esquire, Senior Director, Strategic and Regulatory Affairs at Archer Public Affairs, and Richard T. Thigpen, Senior Vice President, Corporate Citizenship at PSE&G, for taking time out of their extremely busy schedules to chat with us and take questions from members on how the energy policies coming out of Washington, D.C. could affect New Jersey's energy landscape. So we will be hearing from the RICs, which I'm sure will be very confusing for me, for them, and for everyone tuning in momentarily. But I do want to thank them both very much for being with us. As always, I would like to start by thanking the sponsors of today's event, starting with Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, which is the Government Action Series sponsor of the Chamber. And of course, our sponsors of today's specific committee, our Energy Insights Committee. Today sponsoring our event is Atlantic City Electric, New Jersey American Water, Orsted, and PSE&G. It is truly the support of these companies that has enabled the Chamber's programming to continue throughout the duration of the pandemic, although in a virtual setting. And we certainly do look forward to getting back to in-person events, hopefully later this year. Housekeeping items before we begin. In a moment, I'm going to turn the floor over to Hillary Chebra, the Chamber's Manager of Government Affairs, who will introduce Rick and Rick. And then we're going to jump right into our pre-planned questions with each of our guests being able to weigh in. It's going to be a conversation format. It's going to be what we like to call fireside chat format at the Chamber, where I will pose a question and then each of our speakers will both have an opportunity to answer each of the questions posed. As I'm posing those questions, please note that at the bottom of your screen, the chat function is open. I encourage everyone tuning in today to ask any questions you may have of our speakers. When we hit that 11:15 mark or so, we're going to stop with the questions that we have planned in advance and start to take some questions from the audience. So if something comes up or if we have not been able to cover a topic that you're interested in hearing on, please feel free to type it in the chat. I am monitoring that chat. When we get to that 11:15 mark, we're going to take that last 10 to 15 minutes to make sure we answer some of the audience questions. After the event concludes today, you will be receiving a recording of today's event. So as you all know, we do record these events. So if you have to hop on late or drop off early, you can always play it back at your convenience to see what you missed at that time. After the event, you will also be emailed a survey. We do take our members' feedback extremely seriously, and it is your feedback that really helps us shape programming as we continue to plan out virtual and in-person programming throughout the rest of the year. So I would ask respectfully that you take a minute, click on that survey link after we're done today and let us know what you thought of today's program. There are no formal presentations being done today, so there are no PowerPoints or anything to send, so you don't have to worry about that, but do keep an eye out for the recording as well as the survey. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, I'm now going to turn the floor over to Hillary Chebra to introduce today's speakers, and afterwards we're going to get started. So Hillary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. I'm going to start with Richard T. Thigpen. Rick Thigpen was named the Senior Vice President of Corporate Citizenship in July of 2018 and serves as a member of PSE&G's Executive Officer Group and is also the chair of the PSE&G Foundation. He's responsible for areas of the business that drive public policy through advocacy, including federal, state, and local government affairs, sustainability, charitable activities, and corporate social responsibility. Before starting at PSE&G in 2007, Rick was a former assistant to the president of the NAACP State Conference for Public Affairs. He is also a board member of the National American Association of Blacks in Energy and the chair of their Legislative Issues and Public Policy Committee. Rick is extremely active in the community, serving on a number of boards, including the New Jersey Climate Change Alliance, the New Jersey Legislative Black Caucus Foundation, the Brown University Alumni Association, and the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, just to name a few. Rick holds a Doctor of Law degree from Columbia University School of Law and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Brown University. So Rick, thank you so much for being here. And joining Rick Thigpen is Richard Moroz. Rich Moroz is the Senior Director at Archer Public Affairs in Trenton, New Jersey and Washington, D.C., and advises clients in energy, utilities, infrastructure, and financial industries. He is also the senior advisor of Protect Our Power, a national independent nonprofit advocacy organization supporting best practices and investments in cybersecurity and reliance measures for the energy, utility, and critical infrastructure industries. Rick is an immediate past president of the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, and he served as president from October 2014 until January 2018 and remained as commissioner until April of 2018. During his time at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities as president, Rick served as the chairman and chief administrative officer for the agency and acted as the chief energy officer for New Jersey. He's the chairman of the Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners Committee and on Critical Infrastructure and the NARUC liaison for the Electric Sector Coordinating Council and served as president of the organization for the PJM States, Inc. Rick is now a member of the U.S. Department of Energy Electric Advisory Committee, which provides advice to the department on issues of the evolving grid, distributing energy resources, and the reliability of the electric system. Rick holds a BA from the University of Delaware and his JD from the Villanova University School of Law. Thank you both for being with us today. And I'm going to turn the floor back over to Christina so she can jump right into our program.
Thank you so much, Hillary. So let's get to it, gentlemen. Thank you again, both so much for being with us. We're going to get right to the first question here. And we're going to start with really what the president campaigned on, and then some of his actions in his first days in office. So as you both know, at the start of, during the campaign and then at the start of President Biden's presidency, he had stated throughout the duration of that time period that climate change was going to be an ultimate consideration in all foreign and domestic policy decisions. He did sign an executive order to that effect. I want to say it was within the first few days of being in office. And as many know, he also reenlisted the United States in the US Paris Climate Accord. And that again was in those first few days after taking office. So what do these actions mean for New Jersey and how do they complement Governor Phil Murphy's energy goals here in New Jersey? So on this one, Rick Moroz, we're going to start with you first, and then Rick Thigpen, we're going to let you go second. So Rick, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, Christina.
Before beauty.
Obviously, look, I look at this gray hair. I don't know why he doesn't have any. We're the same age. Christina, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me too. I do appreciate it very much. To answer your question, first, I must say, I think part of your question probably answers it. You're right. The president campaigned on these issues, and it was very, very clear through the campaign what he would likely be undertaking to implement once if he were to win, what he would implement in terms of action under executive orders or in legislation, which could be forthcoming. So the actions he's taken so far, first to across the administration, incorporate a policy apparatus and in fact, even individuals to lead those efforts in virtually all agencies, and particularly those that touch energy and the environment, is the implementation of what he said he would do. So at the moment, it's largely the measures that the president's taken are to reinforce through federal efforts, through federal agencies, Department of Energy, EPA, the FERC, and others, how they can effectuate from administrative action of those federal agencies the policies that he's run on, which is the expansion of low carbon emitting generation, the expansion of the grid through renewables, and across various subsectors, the reduction in emissions from various sources. So it's wide ranging, it's administrative in terms of its impact within federal agencies. And it is and very much is tied with the movement towards encouraging the expansion of renewable energy.
Thanks for that, Rick. Rick, do you want to follow up on that?
Yes, absolutely. First off, good morning, everybody. So Joe Biden campaigned on Build Back Better. And it's worth noting that Joe Biden, our president, is from Delaware. And Rick just talked about he's not alone being from New Jersey, having connection with Delaware. So we have a president right next door. And I call it making a virtue out of necessity, what the president has done. He has decided to change our course, and we are very supportive of it, to take very seriously the threat of climate change and to act on that necessity. He is trying his best to make a virtue of this necessity by using climate change as a way to create new jobs, to inspire new economic activity, and to help us really avoid severe consequences of climate change. So we find it quite significant, as we talked about rejoining the Paris Climate Accords. And those Paris Climate Accords are an international agreement designed to avert the worst cases of climate change, a greater than 2 degrees centigrade increase in surface temperature. And to do that is by getting carbon out of the atmosphere. And so our president has now, I think, brought national policy significantly in line with state clean energy policy. So I see exciting new opportunities with what's happened in terms of, and we will talk about offshore wind is sitting there. We will talk about things like clean generation that's sitting there, and also upgrading infrastructure to meet the needs of the future and create fabulous economic opportunity at the same time while doing it. So we are at Public Service excited about this new course. We think it's an absolute necessity that we tackle the challenge together. And none of us should forget that New Jersey has about 130 miles of Atlantic coastline, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has noticed or has observed that New Jersey is among the most severely affected of the lower 48 states from climate change. We all already know we're downwind from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, fossil, coal burning plants that leave, bad things in the air in New Jersey and have health consequences for all of us. So this is absolutely important for the future of New Jersey. If we do not address climate change, we will face the consequences. And the scientists have already taught us that New Jersey is one of the states that will face those consequences first. And Superstorm Sandy is that constant reminder of what that looks like for us.
Thank you, Rick, for that, and both Ricks for your comments. I mean, it's certainly clear, the president's vision was certainly no surprise, very clearly aligns with our governor here in New Jersey. And it's just the implementation. It's what happens next. And so many different companies are taking different approaches. I mean, we're going to talk about a little bit of that as we get a little further in the program, but thank you both for your comments. So let's jump into the second question. We're going to start with Rick Thigpen on this one first. Another item, of course, that President Biden did immediately upon taking office, which was not a huge surprise for those that follow these things, was the cancellation of the permit for the Keystone Pipeline. So for those that are tuning in that may be unfamiliar, it is a 1,200-mile pipeline that was announced back in, I believe it was 2008, and it's been caught in a political maze, a maze of social discussion as well, as many pipelines are, candidly. And although the pipeline doesn't directly run through New Jersey, the effects of this action coming out of Washington does have lingering implications for the state of New Jersey. So again, we're going to start with Rick Thigpen first. Rick, can you speak to the president's decision and the message it sends and what it could mean here in New Jersey?
Which we would argue is more important than the decision itself, the message he sends. So as you mentioned, the Keystone Pipeline is an oil pipeline running through middle America. And from our perspective, it has negligible impact on operations in New Jersey. We have very little bit of use of oil to generate electricity in our state, but it is a very powerful message. The Keystone Pipeline is about oil. The president is sending a very clear message to all of us that we are going to now pay very close attention to our use of fossil fuels and our investment in infrastructure that will sort of cement the use of fossil fuels into the future. There is complaint, and some of this is about politics. And of course, I'm always ready to talk politics, that, about, losing jobs. But as I said before, the president is doing everything in his power to make sure that while you may lose jobs with the Keystone Pipeline, we are going to be creating even more jobs by embracing a clean energy future. So we all know that the necessity of fighting climate change means reducing, curbing our use of fossil fuels. And We all know that the best way to invest in your clean energy future is to invest in those alternatives. So the message he sends is very important. The impacts on New Jersey are negligible, and the goal is to create jobs in other ways than by creating pipelines. I'm sorry, but there is one implication for New Jersey: gas pipelines. Does stopping the Keystone Pipeline mean that stopping gas pipelines will happen? You know, we live within a couple hours drive of a Saudi Arabia size, a reserve of natural gas that has fundamentally changed the energy industry and our economy. And some of that will be very important as we make this transition to keep our prices low. And will it have impact? We already have some pipeline requests in New Jersey. Will it have impacts on the ability to site pipelines in New Jersey? That's worthy of a longer conversation.
Yep. Thanks for that, Rick. A lot of good points made, but Rick Moroz, I feel like you may
Yep.
have a little bit of a different take on this. So
Well,
curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess a couple things. First, I couldn't agree more with what Rick just said about the message that really is that which this is the Keystone Pipeline is really about. It is the message that I think the president wanted to send clearly about fossil fuels. The reality of the use of fossil fuels, including specifically natural gas, however, this decision is not going to short-term or, quite frankly, long-term necessarily impact. Come back to the use of natural gas, particularly in generation across the country, not just here in the region. It is still in the United States about 45% of the fuel of all generation in the country. Even projections from the DOE out to 2030 and 50 still anticipate that natural gas will probably generate 40 to 45%. And that's not just the DOE. Financial analysts who follow the industry say the same thing. So natural gas is not going away. In fact, it can't go away, because if it goes away, the lights won't stay on and we won't be able to heat homes. So this particular project, the Keystone Pipeline, as Rick said, I agree, is about sending a message more than it is the reality of that in continuing traditional infrastructure we have around fossil fuels, which are still going to be a big part of what we need here in the United States as part of an entire energy mix to keep the lights on, to heat and use for production and manufacturing and commercial industrial uses. But will see the expansion, the diversification of all of our energy fuels and generation as we enter this energy transition. So I agree. And we're not here to talk politics, even though I would want to do that too, as Rick and I have done probably for almost 30 years. But I agree with him, and I think our take is not necessarily different. Those realities are still there. I think it depends on how you highlight the issue that's associated with the cancellation of this kind of infrastructure project.
Understood.
Christina, may I just add one point to that? Because
Absolutely.
Another part of that message is we are going to we are going to decarbonize our economy and our energy system, or we are going to face the consequences. It's very hard to talk to you about consequences that we haven't felt yet, but I believe it's very clear our president is making very clear he understands that the consequences are going to be far more severe than the consequences of continuing this use. So also a powerful message behind what he's done that we need to hear, a subtle but powerful message.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen. I want to encourage people tuning in, keep your questions coming in the chat. A few of them that are in the chat, we are teed up to get to momentarily, so hang tight, and we will get to as many questions as possible. But just a reminder that chat function is open. So we're going to move on to our third question. We're going to start with Rick Moroz on this one, and it's about wind energy, right? It's such a critical topic. It's obviously in the news every day here in South Jersey. It has the potential to be such a lifesaver for a really economic depressed area of our region here in South Jersey. It's no surprise to anyone that, as we all know, tuning in, I'm sure New Jersey has been vying to become this offshore wind hub for the Northeast, essentially. And then just Monday of this week, President Biden announced, or the administration president announced that speed up permitting for projects off the East Coast. He specified New Jersey in that announcement. He's talked about investing more in R&D, some other things that specifically will happen with the U.S. ports affiliated with wind development. So, there's been multitudes of reports about the potential for wind energy and, the potential for it to produce X amount of electricity that can be used. The way people make it sound, the possibilities are truly endless as it relates to wind energy. So I'd be curious your thoughts on New Jersey's ability, first of all, to be a major player in this market. It certainly seems like we have positioned ourselves to be that. And then what are the pros and cons of prioritizing wind energy at this level over seemingly other forms of energy? So Rick, we're going to start with you first on this one.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we could probably spend an entire session on these issues, but just a couple of quick thoughts and reactions to it. The first is obviously in New Jersey, and Governor Murphy's made this a centerpiece of his administration and policies around energy, and what the president's done, even in the last week, on the proclamations and the support his administration have given over the last 3 months. Support the continued expansion of renewables, like with offshore wind, at all levels, both the mechanics of it, the economics of it, dealing with all the nitty gritty issues like markets in PJM and how these resources become part of that. That will be part of a Biden administration FERC-led issue to address those markets issues, which are concerns here in New Jersey about how that works and what the costs are. So that is one of the, this is all good news to support that movement towards expanded offshore wind. So the pros are certainly it's a boost. It's a boost for an emerging, growing green energy economy, and everything that comes with it, the jobs, the supply chain. You mentioned the activity on the ports, the announcements of using, for example, Port of Paulsboro for the company EEW that makes the monopoles, and for the work that PS has done with Ørsted around the proposed Salem port for laydown and manufacturing, all of which mean jobs for the region, which can be really good on a river that has for decades been challenged in its operations. And then there's the trickle down of supply chain for equipment and employment all throughout the region. So it's all good news. So there are the pros. The cons are that there are still looming questions about the overall costs of what the deployment will be at the end of the day. Those are discussions that are going on now. And as I mentioned, it's still a question mark about how this will be bid into the marketplace at PJM for the cost of that wind energy. And then there are other concerns through some camps about the reliability issues. As an intermittent resource, wind will not be generating 24 hours a day. The questions about what this transition will look like from existing generation to move towards the implementation of offshore wind, and how you marry it up with continuing generation resources or other technologies, which we still don't have, like storage, energy storage, how that will happen. So these are questions that everyone is grappling with in this new evolving grid. It's everybody in the industry, companies like PS have to deal with, but then the agencies I mentioned, the grid operator, PJM, the DOE, FERC, and then the states. So these are challenges that everybody has to work through, including the very particular questions about planning out what this grid looks like with these new distributed and renewable energy resources as we transition away from a bulk power system that has historically been driven by fossil fuel generation. So lots of challenges, including the planning of this grid going forward.
Sure, really great comments, comprehensive there, Rick. Rick Thigpen, go ahead. I'll let you.
Okay, so first off, at Public Service, we're proud to be Now the BPO has just recently ratified our contract. We are junior partners with Ørsted, who's the winners of at the time, the largest offshore wind solicitation in the United States. And they're in the process, beginning the process of an 1,100 megawatt farm. I noticed that Ørsted is the sponsor here, and I believe a name that is quite familiar to people in South Jersey named Vince Mayone is on this call and representing Ørsted. And that is something that everybody should be happy about. Now, but let me connect this back to our big picture. We are making a commitment as a country to decarbonize our economy. Phil Murphy has set a goal by 2050 of zero carbon generation. Joe Biden has now put on top of that a 2035 goal to have zero carbon out of our generation. That means we have to make changes. Offshore wind has clearly been identified as one of those ways to change the way we've been generating electricity in the past into the future. The president has also recently just announced a huge expansion of offshore wind on the Atlantic seaboard. The Biden administration clearly believes that offshore wind is going to be a key part of our energy generation mix in the future. Now, here in New Jersey, we've taken a leadership position. I've just talked about the largest solicitation in the United States at the time, and we have one already set. We have another 2,400 megawatt solicitation on deck by the state of New Jersey to issue. Phil Murphy has set a goal of 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind, I believe, by 2035. We have the opportunity to make this necessity to decarbonize our generation or face the consequences into a great virtue for our state. And we're in the process of trying to doing that, making offshore wind, manufacturing and assembling a real economic generator in New Jersey above and beyond the carbon-free generation of electricity that will come from it. And clearly the White House is now on the same page as New Jersey. There are lots of issues to be sorted out. There's lots of politics to manage, and Rick just alluded to it. With this large expansion of offshore wind as a way to generate electricity, it will also necessitate an expansion of transforming the onshore transmission grid in order to accommodate that new need, and business opportunities will come from that as well. So we are going to create a new set of economic opportunities in this state, in this country, by responding to the necessity of climate change. And I think our governor has us having the potential to grab a lot of the economic activity around manufacturing and creating offshore wind in our state and the jobs that come with it. So hopefully the future of New Jersey is going to be about clean energy. And hopefully if we do it right, it's going to be a prosperous future. And clearly offshore wind is going to be a part of that future.
Thank you both. Now I'm going to throw you guys a curveball that is not something we talked about before, but obviously with President Biden in the House and Governor Murphy here as governor of New Jersey, very aligned, as we're hearing today, very aligned. We are likely going to have, more than likely, we'll see what happens, another 4 years of Governor Murphy. But let's say, hypothetically speaking, we didn't, and another governor came into office with different energy goals. This framework that we've put in place with wind energy, with doing some creative things with solar, with nuclear energy, which we'll get to in a minute, how does that throw things for a loop? Because so often the politics come into play in all of these decisions. Now, all three of us have now alluded to the politics of energy policy. And there's politics in all policy, as we know. But what happens when we don't have a strong advocate for renewables and clean energy here in New Jersey, whenever that day comes, if it comes? I'm not saying it will. Then what happens? What in your crystal ball, what happens then? I would be curious to hear from both of you on it.
Pick your Rick.
All right, well, we'll go with Rick Moroz first, because
Okay. I'll let Rick Thigpen take it first now. I think it depends, Christina. It's an excellent question. It's one that probably people will continue to raise. It depends on what that other candidates' positions are, right? But I think that regardless, the movement nationally towards renewable energy, cleaner sources of energy, lower emitting sources are going to continue to expand. We're going to continue to have more distributed energy resources, whether it's solar and storage or wind, and it's nationally, it's not just here. I think the question that you asked probably could be narrowed. Would offshore wind potentially be something that another governor might think differently? If that were the case, I think if nothing else, the initiative might slow down. There might be other looks at the issues, but I think this expansion towards cleaner emitting sources and renewable energy and DER, distributed energy resources, happening all over the country. You know, we're seeing the retirement of coal plants, we're seeing the retirement of other even natural gas plants, but still there is probably a perspective someone else might bring to say, let's take a look at the entire energy mix, not just focus maybe on one resource or another.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay. So first off, in my previous answer, I neglected to mention that one of South Jersey's members of Congress, Jeff Van Drew, has been named a co-chair of the House Offshore Wind Caucus, number one. So that's worth everybody hearing who lives in South Jersey. Number two is, unfortunately, the very, very severe partisan divide we now witness in this country does not leave alone this issue. So there is a genuine threat that a change in governor could result in a change in strategy. There is no doubt that offshore wind and the clean energy future legislative prospects are intimately affected by this right now, this division. And many times the disagreements are about partisanship in Washington, not about the specific policies. And we've seen that on things like the American Rescue Plan that was just passed, and it was done on a strict party line vote. So there is no doubt that that threat is a real threat. Forget whose side you prefer, but I will stick with the challenge that we are facing of decarbonizing our economy and our energy generation, or facing very severe consequences. And Superstorm Sandy is the premier example of those consequences. And I'll just say very quickly, for public service, who had built all kinds of utility infrastructure in different places, you know, to serve our customers. Many of that was built during the time of Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, and it never got wet. But along came Superstorm Sandy, and many of those stations faced 6 to 8 feet of water. So our times are changing. There are consequences we must face, and this partisan divide is a very, very real threat to preventing us from having intelligent, serious conversation about how we are going to face this challenge of decarbonization and climate change. And I'm not sure if there are any words that can bring us together to overcome that partisanship, so we talk together. But I agree with Rick, there's a very real threat of a very significant change of direction in New Jersey if our governor changes party, and the same happens in Washington. It's also possible that we change direction in New Jersey, but Washington doesn't, and then we face those consequences as well.
And I'll jump in here too. I agree with Rick on this too. So we, there needs to be real conversations about these issues, these policy issues. Everyone needs to be engaged in it, and I do wish it does not become the politics that drive these decisions around energy policy. It should be the decisions around energy policy that everyone can come together.
Yes, they should be bipartisan. And I think we now know that Washington is not going to be bipartisan in the near future. And that is going to significantly limit the options of the Biden administration to move forward with strong support on how they attack climate change. But it's also clear that they're going to continue to move forward even in the face of the partisan divide they have to manage.
Well, thank you both for humoring me as I threw that curveball in. I appreciate it. We're going to move on to nuclear energy at this point. And obviously, we're going to start with you, Rick Thigpen, on this one. For those maybe
The good Rick.
Yeah.
Before the better Rick.
I love all of my members equally. We've talked about this, gentlemen. Listen, it goes without saying that, nuclear energy is fundamental to New Jersey's energy landscape. It's certainly a huge contributor to the South Jersey economy, with Salem and Hope Creek being here in Salem County. Worldwide, however, and Rick can probably correct me if I'm wrong, there are nuclear plants, a record number of nuclear plants aimed to be closing this year. So this is a worldwide trend we're seeing. And then we also have here in New Jersey, a plant that already closed, Oyster Creek. So let's talk about the importance of nuclear energy in the greater picture of Biden's energy landscape. And, we're talking about bipartisanship a second ago. I mean, traditionally, Congress has been decently bipartisan on the issue of nuclear energy. Again, Rick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd be very curious how nuclear energy fits in this, if it does, and what the overall impact this policy and the Biden administration's policies can have on nuclear energy globally, and of course here in New Jersey. So Rick Thigpen, we'll start with you.
Sure. So nuclear energy is an important part of making our clean energy future affordable. And there are many who have concerns about nuclear, but I think there's wisdom to at least view it as a key to making that transition affordable for all of us in New Jersey. Now, having said that, nuclear is a big part of New Jersey. And, that is the largest commercial generating facility in America down in Salem County at Lower Alloways Creek. So we are very proud of being the operators of that plant, and it does have an outstanding record of safety. Having said that, nuclear produces about 40% of the electricity of all residents of New Jersey, and that includes people like me up in North Jersey, as well as people in South Jersey. It is also the producer of about 90% of the carbon-free electricity produced in the state of New Jersey. So nuclear plays an integral part in our clean energy, in achieving our clean energy goals, without a doubt. Nuclear is also a very, very important economic asset for South Jersey. There are over 1,600 direct jobs and close to another 3,000 indirect jobs that are created mostly in southern New Jersey as a result of having that economic activity going in nuclear to run those plants. So nuclear is an essential part of New Jersey's economy. It is an essential, and I believe it's well over $1 billion, 1.2 billion, I believe, a year that nuclear adds to New Jersey's gross domestic product by that economic activity. So nuclear is a very powerful economic asset for the state. By having the nuclear generation, we are saving our clean air. It prevents from, like happened with Oyster Creek, it prevents from having, upwind fossil generators, especially the coal ones, running more often and sending their particulate matter and mercury into the air for us to breathe in New Jersey, and generating some additional healthcare consequences. I don't want to overstate that, but I don't want to understate that either. And then I think Bill Gates most recently came out with a statement. There's a lot of political issues around nuclear, there's no doubt, but nuclear is an essential part of the transition to clean energy and making it affordable. It is worth noting, I don't want to go into those details too much, that the BPU right now on April 27th, I think Rick has been there, is going to have its vote on whether or not to continue the zero emissions credit program to keep nuclear alive in New Jersey. So it's not just an academic conversation we're having. The fate of nuclear is actually to be decided very soon at our BPU. So that's also very important for people to hear. I like to say things to help inspire people to want to speak in support of nuclear, of course. But it's clear that Joe Biden has come to recognize, and don't forget, as a United States Senator from Delaware since, I believe, 1972, he's had a front row seat on the Salem generating stations. You can see Salem from Delaware very clearly. I was actually a high school student in Delaware and they were building the nuclear power plants. And there is no doubt that Joe Biden is intimately familiar with nuclear, intimately aware of the benefits of it, and that there is every evidence that the administration is now understanding that nuclear is a part of the clean energy future. And I'll just say, it is the key to making the clean energy future transition affordable. And so we're very proud to have it in New Jersey. And we need all the help we can get to make sure everybody understands just how important it is to New Jersey's future, everybody.
Thank you for that, Rick. I mean, given PS's interest, of course, we want to start with you on that, but Rick Moroz, piggyback off it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nuclear energy is vital to New Jersey and to the United States for its energy needs. Just to digress for a minute, and Rick and I worked on these issues when I went to the BPU in 2014. People forget this, that PSE&G was actually considering a new nuclear construction. I was on the verge of visiting nuclear power plants that were under construction in Georgia and in South Carolina for that very reason. Things have changed dramatically since then. But the fact remains that nuclear energy is really still essential as a building block for energy production in the United States. Here in New Jersey, it still accounts, it's 30% still. It was 45 or thereabouts. It's more than 30, I guess, here now, Rick. But it was around 45% with Oyster Creek. We have a big stake in nuclear here in New Jersey, and we need to keep it going. And by the way, the projections of the current energy plans for New Jersey, even with the expansion of renewable energy and offshore wind, still account for that continued operation of that amount of electricity, 30% still to be produced from nuclear here in New Jersey. Across the country, I think it's still and is projected to continue to produce clean, zero carbon emitting electricity. I think it's about 25% of all production of electricity in the United States. So it is essential. And just to also digress for a minute, when I was the president of the BPU, I very much was active with the industry trying to advocate for the continuation of the units at Salem. And as governor, working with Governor Christie, who I served in his cabinet, he supported it too. We were working with the industry on the legislation. We didn't get it done. It came at the beginning of the Murphy administration, but that is essential to keep those units running. During that time, I even worked with the companies to try and advocate for a market-based solution at PJM to support the nuclear units and keep them running. They are essential. They're essential for keeping the lights on, but they're also essential with meeting the goals that we are now talking about for low carbon emitting electricity, both here in New Jersey and nationally. And people need to understand that and understand the importance of nuclear. The other is advanced nuclear technologies, the SMR, small modular reactors, and other technologies that are in production right now, or at least in research, probably within the next 10 years, have the real possibility of being commercially available. And these are units not like the Salem unit, which is a large generation facility. These could be 50 megawatts or up to 100, and they could be part of an on-site solution for large commercial facilities that need power, or another future source of clean energy is the production of hydrogen. We don't have time to get into all that, but nuclear and particularly advanced nuclear technology and generation facilities can be married up with hydrogen production, and we can then look at really bold solutions for meeting these low or zero emission goals that we're talking about nationally and in fact worldwide.
And if I may jump in on it, Rick raised something very important, and I do want to out Rick to everybody. He was the president of the BPU when the nuclear crisis came to New Jersey. And while he was a tough guy, he worked with us, he listened to us. He was a key part of us taking the first steps to finding a solution. So that's something hopefully he's proud of, that he was a part of finding a way to keep Salem operating. So I do want to thank you for that publicly, Rick.
Thank you.
Having said that, he is correct. Market-based solutions and Washington participation in this solution should be required. It is not fair that New Jersey is left to deal with these consequences caused by the marketplace and caused by policies in Washington alone. And we are so thankful that we've been able to have receptive governors, first Governor Christie with Rick Moroz, now Governor Murphy with Joe Fiordaliso, willing to listen to this very daunting challenge about how to keep nuclear going, caused by people in Washington, setting up market rules that don't do things like reflect the costs of carbon in electric prices. So very important. And, public service, we have this vision, we call it powering progress. And I haven't mentioned it yet, but it starts with everybody learning to use less electricity. And this is a key part of our nuclear, right? Use less. Energy efficiency should never be out of the conversation. We all have some energy hog responsibilities. We all have kids, right? Turn out the lights when you leave a room, right? Basic stuff, right? We all got to pay attention to those things. We also have to generate the electricity we use as clean as possible. And nuclear is absolutely essential to making that happen, especially in an affordable fashion. And then we also have to recognize, and there's huge business opportunity coming, that we have to make our electric grid more reliable as well. because, as we work from home, power outages at the Moreau's home now is not just an inconvenience where his kids are driving him crazy. Now he can't do his business, he can't make money. And now, so reliability has got to be increased. And we're going to be investing in the grid, both to facilitate, clean energy, also to facilitate the fact that people are working from home and they need more reliability. And also to recognize that after storms, people's tolerance for being out of power for long periods of time has dwindled enormously. So nuclear is a key element to making a brighter future for New Jersey, and people should not forget it and don't allow, sort of these other, conversations to get in the way. It really is a part of our going forward strategy.
Yep. Well, thank you both for that. We had planned 8 questions in advance, but we are 13 minutes out from the end of our time here, and we have so many questions that members have asked. I want to get to some of them right now. So one question was posed by 3 different members in 3 different ways, but all gets to the same point. It's about the cost of gasoline. So we're talking about President Biden and his energy policies. Well, President Biden took office and gasoline prices went up, and they went up, and they went up, and they went up. We here in New Jersey, especially here in South Jersey, we drive everywhere. We don't have any sort of public transportation here to utilize. Is this something that, we in New Jersey should be concerned about? It clearly is having an impact on gasoline prices and therefore affecting our drivers here in New Jersey. And on top of that, of course, here in New Jersey, we know we just had another gas tax increase, which could have been stalled, but wasn't. So curious your thoughts on the Biden administration and what we're seeing reflected in his energy policies in the gasoline prices. I open the floor up to whoever would like to start first.
So Rick, I'll go if you want.
Sure.
So obviously gasoline prices are not in the portfolio of public service, and we understand that. But I do want to talk about the challenge that we've talked about, the message of rejoining the Paris Climate Accords and what the president is doing. We are faced with the challenge of decarbonizing our economy. There are some good things that come with that and some bad things, but there is no doubt that the very bad comes if we do not do it and we face the more serious consequences of climate change in the state of New Jersey with its 130-mile Atlantic coastline and being downwind from, electric generators in the interior of our country. Gas prices going up. We do not have any expertise to offer on that, but we do understand on our side of the table that affordability of clean energy is absolutely essential if you're going to be able to maintain and sustain the political support for moving towards a clean energy agenda. And so we are on our side of the table are focusing very hard on that. That's one of the reasons we are supportive of maintaining the nuclear generation in New Jersey. That's one of the reasons we are so strongly in support of energy efficiency. We are also recognizing that there are a series of other things need to be done about the clean energy future, and how to make them affordable is both a political football as well as a very, very meaningful policy challenge. It is, but we do believe that we do need to talk seriously about how to decarbonize, and that we should not allow anything to get in the way, because our children and grandchildren will never forgive us if we don't do this.
Rick Moroz, care to comment?
Yeah, let me address the question first and then make a couple other observations. First, the price of gasoline, and I'm not an expert on it, but the price of gasoline is affected by a whole series of factors which go beyond just what the president of the United States might say on any one day.
Like tankers getting stuck in the Suez Canal.
Exactly. They're worldwide marketplace issues there, or they could be ripple effects, for example, from what happened in Texas several weeks ago, as much as any policy statements or forward-thinking issues around the traders or in a market like that for a commodity, and what's going on in the Middle East, for example. So something like the cost of gasoline is dependent on a whole series of issues. So I'll come back to the cost issue, period, and the issues I just mentioned, like what happened in Texas, and even some of the issues that Rick just sort of touched on around the reliability, and I'll call it the resilience of our infrastructure. we should be looking at across the board. And I mean we, policymakers, regulators, business people, and the average consumer really need to be looking at how these issues affect their costs. Costs of driving their vehicle, for a business, their transport costs, their electric bill, their gas bill, their heating bill, their lighting bill. Look at all of those issues, those costs. Rick mentioned energy efficiency. And my friend Joe Fiordalisa, the current president of the BPU, is the one that likes to say that cheapest kilowatt of electricity is the one that you don't use, is the energy efficiency measure where you can reduce your cost. So, Christina, I'd say your members and even those who've asked the question really need to be looking across the board at, how all of what we do, the decisions we make, the policies, how they affect their business, how they affect their own costs, and try to engage in those issues so that they can, in fact, protect their own interests around what it costs them to do business or to be here in New Jersey or anywhere else.
Thank you both for that. Another question we had in the chat, which I think is a good one, and we have touched on, we being you have both touched on this a little bit in your comments here and there. But the issue of emissions and getting the U.S. to a 0% emissions rate is obviously a very laudable goal. But this is not a United States issue. This is a global issue. This is not just affecting us here. It's affecting us worldwide. So the question in the chat, which I feel like is absolutely one that should be talked about, is that a lot of the technologies that we need and to get these renewables off the ground, to get lower emission rates and the like, are expensive. And because this is a global issue, the United States, New Jersey, the United States, we could do anything that we want to get to lower our carbon footprint. And at the end of the day, we still have countries like India and China that are not there in lockstep with the United States. So how do we balance the costliness and the cost impact that these kinds of goals have versus the enormity of the goals and the importance of the goals? What would you say to a comment like that? Rick Moroz, we'll start with you.
Well, that's, I think, the conversation, dialogue, and debate that's happening. And it probably also, at some levels, does impact the politics of these discussions. Like the United States has been a leader on the carbon goals, which come from or were manifested in the Paris Accords, has been a leader in prior administrations, and now very particularly again with the Biden administration. And the United States is leading a lot, and other countries are leading in reducing emissions. Some of the other countries you mentioned are not. I mean, they're still heavily reliant on fossil fuels and will probably continue to be. So this is an international affairs issue as much as anything, which does in fact then trickle down and drive some of this debate and the politics of it. So that's the only thing I can say, because it is very much about the priority of this administration right now to transition the United States infrastructure to lower carbon emitting goals as a signal to the rest of the world to do the same. That's what this in a macro consideration, a macro sort of foreign affairs consideration is what this discussion's about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I agree with Rick. No, I agree with Rick. I would only add that if we step back and think about large international problems, which ones can you name have been solved without the United States leadership in the last half century, maybe even century? And so there's no doubt that this requires international cooperation, but I really do. I was joking. I agree with Rick 100%. I find it hard for any of us to envision it ever happening without United States minimum participation and not leadership in helping to move the planet forward, hopefully together.
Yep.
The only thing I would add is that hopefully the United States has the real smarts, the technologies that we could hope to export that other countries could take advantage of, some of which I mentioned already, including nuclear, advanced nuclear, hydrogen technologies, and working with other countries to look at those alternatives as opposed to the continued use of those fossil resources.
And I would just add, partisanship is the devil in the mix with this problem.
So we only have a few minutes left. We have a bunch of questions in the chat about other emerging or existing technologies that can be added to diversify the renewable energy portfolio we haven't talked about today, or maybe just touched on. In the chat, there are comments, obviously, about battery storage, hydropower, tidal power. What are your thoughts about some things we did not talk about today? Because we barely scratched the surface, as you know, about things that could be added to this portfolio that could help achieve these goals. What are your thoughts?
I'll jump in.
You were polite, Ricks, too.
We should consider them all, and I think to go after the goals that we are setting in this country for low emissions or zero emissions generation, and as I said, at the same time, what's happening with the evolution of the grid because of the nature of it for resilience purposes that drive towards more DER, distributed energy resources or generation, and the technology that's helping to drive it, we do need to look at other alternatives, and certainly certain renewable resources that are otherwise intermittent, including, by the way, solar, and as I mentioned, wind. We need to be looking how to marry that up with other resources. Storage is the big one, but that means a lot of things. It could be batteries in small or large scale. It could be grid scale storage, as you mentioned, pump storage, large reservoirs, for example, that can be used. There are other technologies that are explored elsewhere throughout the United States. We should be looking at all of those, including the ones we've already mentioned: nuclear, hydrogen. All of these, look at all of these resources to see what mix of them eventually works as we do evolve this grid to a much different place, one that is less reliant on bulk power, large power plants driving the power to the end user, where we have much more distributed resources and we've got generation sort of all over the place, and different technologies may be better suited in different locations to reach that evolution we're talking about.
Sure. Rick, final words here. Anything that we did not touch on today that could be included in this energy portfolio in the United States or here in New Jersey?
Ooh, there's so much to cover. We talked about offshore wind and the fabulous opportunity. We've talked about the necessity of all of us embracing energy efficiency as a challenge and a responsibility. We certainly in New Jersey also have a large solar industry that will continue to grow. We have to think about our modernizing our transmission system to facilitate that, these new generation sources getting that electricity to the places it needs to. And we also got to make our grid smarter and more resilient, because even as we debate this, the weather is getting more severe, and we've got to be able to have a system that, especially our overhead system, that is able to withstand it. I think Rick mentioned a little bit, battery storage is out there. We have distribution system engineers who could give you a far more clear and detailed answer than myself, but those are all very important steps we've got to take. And we've got to do our best to create jobs and make it affordable so people come along. And I'm going to say it again, partisan advantage is a devil in this mix, and it's not going to go away, but I want to call it out, because that is going to impede our progress. And it's a very tricky way for us to have this conversation together. We've also got to make sure that as 75% of us heat our homes and businesses with gas, we've got to make sure that we reduce the methane leaking into the environment as well. So there are lots of little pieces there, but a very exciting challenge for us all. And I just say, one thing we have in common, we all love our children, and we love our grandchildren too. And this is just a part of our responsibility for the future. And we got to make it affordable today for all of us in order for people to support it.
Well, I think that's a great note to close on, Rick. So I want to thank you both. You are both extremely busy, and I appreciate you taking an hour of your time to kind of walk through some of these issues. We could do this for another 3 hours easily. I think this really gave our members a nice broad brush of some of the really most timely and topical issues facing New Jersey and how that fits in to our national policy that is clearly continuing to evolve with the Biden administration. So thank you both. I also take a moment to again thank our sponsors, Verizon, Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, Atlantic City Electric, New Jersey American Water, Orsted, and PSE&G for their continued generosity and support. Everyone joining us online today, have a great rest of your day. Keep an eye out for that recording if you want to watch it back, and also the survey. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you online again soon. Thanks, Rick and Rick.
Thank you.